Irish rockers Ash is set to hit Australia and New Zealand this coming March for a run of shows celebrating 30 years of Ash, dubbed the Teenage Wildlife Tour. Heavy was lucky enough to catch up with bass player Mark Hamilton during the week for a chat.
Hi, this is Mark from Ash, and happy to be here.
Beautiful, Mark. Thanks for joining us today, mate.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm actually currently I'm in New Jersey, which is just beside New York, really,
Oh, very nice, mate. And
New
of
York
course,
City.
Ash will be returning to Australia this March for a run of shows starting in Brisbane on March 21st before moving through Melbourne, Sydney, and Adelaide and finishing in Perth on March the 28th. So, how are you feeling about the tour?
We're excited. I think it's been about 4 years since we've been down to Australia. So, and we've also had like the global pandemic, which kind of threw an oar in all of our touring plans. So for about I think it was like a year and a half, we weren't even able to play a show, which was like the first time in our 30-year career that we haven't been able to do anything. But we did actually record. We got in the studio and recorded some stuff. So there's a lot of new music, actually 2 albums worth, which we'll be releasing at some point, over the next year or 2 years.
Yeah, very good. And this tour is called the Teenage Wildlife Tour, which will be celebrating 30 years of Ash as a band. It's not a bad milestone, mate. 30 years.
Yeah, it's kind of flown by. Whenever you think 30 years, it seems so long. We did a big sort of like anniversary show in Belfast just before Christmas, which was we had like a bunch of guests up, and it was a wild milestone to sort of hit. And I guess whenever you're in a band, whenever you're doing it all the time, you really don't think about like how long you've been doing it. It's because you're always looking forward. You're always looking at the next tour or the next album, or whatever's on the horizon. You don't spend a lot of time looking back.
Mm.
So I guess it was kind of nice to do that, sort of like almost like it was a greatest hits album essentially, and go out and like tour it, and and you come into Australia and New Zealand and Japan. We always had intended for that to be part of the tour a couple of years ago, but then obviously the pandemic, so we're almost like playing catch up to do it now.
Yeah, true. And the album with the same name, Teenage Wildlife, came out in early 2020, mate. So that was essentially a best of album. So are you going to be playing all of the songs off that, or is it going to be a bit varied?
I think a lot of what's on that album, you're going to hear a lot of what's on that album. So it's actually a pretty good spread of like, all of our career, because that's what the album is. It's a total mixed bag.
Yeah.
But it's essentially all the singles off. It's most of the singles off all those albums, and then a couple of like strong songs which we felt were they may not have been singles, but we felt were like highlights on the album, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And so how do you still keep things fresh and exciting for yourselves as a band after 30 years?
Well, one of the things we did actually, so it's about probably 10 years ago now, maybe 12 years ago now. We had done five like studio albums, and we thought that we wanted to do something new. We felt like the sort of like the album format had got a bit tired, and it was around that time whenever digital, people were like distributing music digitally mostly, and albums almost didn't matter because it was all song based, individual tracks.
Yeah.
So we put out like we decided we did this project. We called it the A to Z series, and it was like 26 singles that we put out one every 2 weeks over the course of a year. So we did that instead of just doing a traditional album, and actually it ended up being about 2 albums worth of music, which we then like released as compilations like after the fact.
Yeah.
Well, so we put out those 26 singles, and that was kind of like that was so much work that we were like, oh my god. And also we can't like we released it on our own labels, sort of say. So like we did it. I think we made about 4 or 5 videos for those singles, and then it was like we would run out of money because like videos cost a bunch of money to make, and then we were like, oh well, we can't really do any more. So then we kind of went after that. We thought there was like a couple of years break, and we thought, you know what, vinyl started to have a resurgence, and people were buying vinyl again. And we thought, you know what, we should just go back to making another album. And after after doing the A to Z and then going back to the album, we kind of focused in and thought, because the A to Z was really eclectic, we kind of like did, we wanted each single to be very different from the previous one. So we actually got quite experimental, which was really good. And I think that kind of let us be exercise a lot of like creativity that we wanted to like get out. And then after that, we did Kablamo, which was an album which was almost like going back to early Ash sound, but it was quite sort of like a focused sound, similar kind of songs. And then we did an Islands album, which was again probably kind of like what I would consider like a classic Ash sound. And now we've done, well, I can't really talk too much about what the next two albums are, but they started off. One album is more almost like a condensed album version of like that A to Z project, where it's really schizophrenic and the songs are vastly different, almost too different. So what we maybe had to do was like, rather than have this really schizophrenic album, we kind of split them into two kinds. One's almost like a more of like a rock album, and then the other one's more like an experimental kind of like pop kind of thing. You know, I wouldn't say just straight up pop, but like, you know, there's still going to be guitars and stuff in it, but it's quite left field, while the other one's got more rock in it.
Yeah.
So we'll have two albums coming out within a relatively short period of time with two very different sounds.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
So that, I mean, doing stuff like that keeps it fresh for us.
Yeah. So how about on stage, mate? Like as much as our passion for life and music is the same after nearly 3 decades, it's a sad fact, I guess, that our bodies sort of tend to argue with that. So how do you compensate for the fact that you might not be able to be so physically invested in some of the songs 30 years later?
I don't really, I mean, I'm kind of lucky in that I think if you can keep yourself relatively fit, then you can still, I mean, have you seen Mick Jagger on stage? The guy still has it. You know what I mean? So like, if you weren't looking after yourself and you were like really let yourself go and you were like badly overweight, I mean, then you're going to start getting into more problems. But I think round about that age of whenever I got to like about 40, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to start looking after myself a bit more.
Yeah.
You know, if you want this career to like, if you want to still be able to just like, you know, deliver the goods on stage, you're going to have to look after yourself a bit more. So yeah, I never, like, especially when I was younger, I didn't go to the gym a lot or anything, but like now I'm like, you know, I wouldn't say I go a lot, but I'm trying to like, you know, do quite a lot of running and stuff. I like going on runs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also, I mean, we still like to have good time. When we go out on tour, you're going to like inevitably end up at like, you know, a lot of socializing and meeting people you've not met in years, and you know, going to bars and having drinks and stuff. But rather than doing like 20 shots and like having to get carried out of the bar, you're probably a bit more relaxed. because one thing that does happen is like, as you get older, the hangovers get worse. Yeah. So, you know, if you want to be able to function the next day, you just have to sort of like, you know, take it easy.
Well said. I suppose it's fair at this point to sort of journey a bit down memory lane with you, mate, because it is a 30-year anniversary. So you started Ash with Tim and Rick back in 1992, mate. So what was the musical climate like back then that gave birth to the band, and where did you fit in initially?
Oh, well, we were totally born out of like, I guess, the sort of like Seattle scene in that was the music that we were primarily listening to when we were that age. And before that, we had been listening to like a lot of metal, like a lot of like Iron Maiden and Megadeth, and even bands like that weren't necessarily metal, but like, you know, hard rock bands like the Chili Peppers and stuff. But all that stuff was like super complicated instrumentally, and we were still like kids who, you know, hadn't learned to play that proficiently yet. Yeah. So whenever Nirvana came along, it was more about the sort of like the passion and the songwriting and the music and just the delivery of the music, and it was like, and the energy behind it. And, you know, it was essentially, you know, a lot of like, I guess like punk DIY ethics or ethos as well, which we had to always kind of subscribe to, because I mean, we were putting on our own shows in like school assembly halls or in like the town arts center, and just doing, you know, putting our own posters, flying them around towns. I mean, that was kind of like in our DNA. So, I mean, we kind of identified with that kind of like what the message that Nirvana had. and like they were definitely our like biggest influence at the time. And then then after Nirvana, there was bands like Weezer, who brought, I guess, maybe more melody and sort of like pop hooks, like from the Beach Boys. We always had like we always really loved bands like the Beach Boys and even ABBA and stuff like that. So it was kind of a mixture of like really good melodic pop music with like the sort of like the energy and the sort of like the attitude of like the sort of like, of bands like Nirvana and Mudhoney. But then also we still didn't completely shred those early metal tendencies. So we'd have more guitar solos and like putting riffs into the songs as well. So it's kind of a blend of that, really.
Mm. And I guess you would have seen many musical trends come and go over the last 30 years, mate. So as a band, have you ever tried to sort of change it all to suit those times, or have you more followed your own path?
I think for the most part we've followed our own path, but I mean it's probably hard to not. I mean, I think even subconsciously you pick up on things that are happening in the music scene and maybe try. Like I know that during that A to Z project that we did, well, we released 26 singles, but we actually recorded, I think, nearly 70 songs, and a lot of them were like bonus tracks. And because we always had a B side, and then there was always like bonus tracks we released on the internet only and stuff. So we were creating so much music, we were almost like looking at what was around us and saying, oh, we could try something in that kind of vein, or
Mm-hmm.
So and inevitably, whenever you like take influences for something, you'll use that as a starting point. But then what you end up with after you've recorded it and like added all your own flavors to it, it's going to sound very different. So sometimes you would maybe like play a song, like a new song, to like friends, or like say, what do you think of this? And you sort of say, so like it kind of has this kind of like, we were kind of looking at, I'm not going to say what band, but we were looking at this band as a sort of a starting point for the for the ideas or the sound or something.
Yeah.
And they'll go, oh, that sounds nothing like them. And you're like, okay, well, that's kind of good. But that's just where it spawned from.
Yeah. Too easy. All right, Mark. Well, thanks very much for your time today, mate. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Ash are out here for the Teenage Wildlife Tour starting March 21 in Brisbane, mate. So get yourself a ticket and get along the show to celebrate 30 years of Ash.
Awesome. Hopefully see you out there.
All right, thanks, bro. I'm going back to bed now.
All right.
Catch you later, man.
Sleep tight. Good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.